our Around the World segment tonight, the Trump administration is considering pulling the U.S. out of the United Nations Human Rights Council. And according to a new expose, the council responsible for creating international human rights laws doesn't practice human rights themselves. According to the author of the expose, this has created a major threat to the environment, to climate change, to human right to life, and the well-being of the world. With me now, that author herself of Anti-Human Rights and Anti-Environmental Practices of the UN, Misused American Taxes, Pallavi Kakoti-McHugh. Pallavi, thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's great to have you here. I mean, first of all, congratulations on your book, on your expose. And let me just preface this by saying you argue that you think the United States should leave the United Nations. Tell me why.
It's because of two reasons. Firstly, environment. There are a whole lot of environmental professionals out there who are not even qualified in environment or climate change. They're the ones who are teaching to the government officers and choosing PhD researchers. They do not have environmental qualifications. And when I raised the issue, they did their usual thing of discredit, cover up. I have a letter from one of the Assistant Secretary Generals of the United Nations, which I can provide in any court, where my credentials were, they said that I do not have an environmental degree. I have an environmental degree in science, in environmental law from Australia and New Zealand. Then and also what was happening, what I noticed, they were choosing students, researchers from non-Western countries, non-Western countries, and there was racial segregation. And I have this letter to prove it.
Right. It's absolutely shocking what you said. It sounds like they weren't actually, well, it's basically quackery. It's environmental quackery. They weren't providing people or putting people in charge who actually had the qualifications to do so. Talk to me about the racial segregation thing. I mean, that's a lot worse than just falsifying an environmental degree.
Okay, because of my accent, I had this interview. I was invited in straight away because of my Indian name. And I'm married to a New Zealander, so my McHugh part of my name I didn't use it. So my name was Indian, my citizenship was Indian. And then they spoke to me and I tripped them up. They were harassing me asking me whether I have permanent residence of Australia, what is my connection with Western countries, Australia, and I refuse to answer it because I know, according to human rights law, their created human rights law, according to Australia's law, that's a discriminatory question. And then when I raised the issue, first of all, they ignored me. Then I said, I'll keep on going to the top. So I went to one of the Undersecretary Generals and I said, I'm going to go to the media, what's going on? And then all of a sudden I heard from them because I know how they cover up and you won't hear anything unless you mention the word media. So I did hear from them and they lied to me outright about a UN policy. They said, because I applied also for a scholarship, which is only open to developing countries, that's why they can harass me about this, about my connection with Western countries. But the thing is, it's a lie because the only requirement for that scholarship was citizenship. Citizenship is an entirely different thing from permanent residence visa. I'm married to a New Zealander who lives in Australia, so I have permanent residence visa of both Australia and New Zealand. That does not make me a citizen of New Zealand or Australia.
Right, it just makes you able to actually visit or reside with your husband. Two entirely different things. Pallavi, let me ask you this, though. You also allege that there was misuse of millions of dollars of American taxpayer money. What did you see? How were they misused?
First of all, the first thing I did notice when I entered the UN in New York, there were people whom you'd look at them and like, how did they get in? A lot of them are not even fluent in English, and they were writing legal analysis and things like that. And a lot of them didn't know basic things, which I, as an academic, as a student in New Zealand and Australia, I'd expect a first-year student to know. And what was happening was they all got in through their Young Professionals program, which I looked it up. Young Professionals program allows some countries to enter and some countries not to enter. And I was there during the economic crisis of US, and I had peers, American peers, who deserved to work at the UN, but they couldn't enter because America wasn't in the list. Last year, America is in the list. But look at, I'm from India. I was born in India. So I remember clearly the British, during the British Raj, you had dogs and Indians not allowed kind of signboards, which is racial segregation. Same thing in South Africa. So what's the difference? These people make a human rights law. What's the difference? It's still racial segregation if you're allowing some countries to enter and some countries not to. And that means what's happening is an entire system of choose first based on race and then merit is happening. And this is the program through which you start your international civil service career. And I met so many Americans who deserve to be at the UN, and I met a lot of people who, I don't mean to be unkind, but they weren't suitable.
Right, they weren't qualified to be there. Pallavi, this is so interesting to me. This is so interesting to me, and I know you go into more detail in your book about the corruption that was rife in the UN too, that there was lawlessness among the United Nations staff, that there was even, cover-ups of sexual abuse of starving women and children, not protecting civilians, those types of really, really serious, very egregious human rights abuses that the United Nations either knew about and covered up or actually took part in. And that I'll leave to our viewers to look up in your book. Very interesting. Thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it.